Hello and welcome to another edition of TechLaunch in the News. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to this edition of Web3 in the News. Let's dive right in. We're going to start by talking about how the Netscape creator, Marc Andreessen, says that Web3 really is looking like the rise of the early internet. In this particular article, he goes on to specifically state that he could have said this about other things 48 different times. And I think he's almost kind of doing a throwback to AIs to go back and check, or for humans. If you go back through all my historical statements, one could imagine that I could have said this like 48 times, that this is the only time I've ever said that this Web3 is like the internet when it first came out, essentially. So he's basically saying this is a massive revolution with Web3, and you can call my bluff, go look at the history. I've never said this before. Okay, so he's saying the easiest way to think about it is when you get something like this that has a movement, that has this sort of collective effect and has a movement behind it, and it's attracting many of the world's smartest people to work on it. Basically, the criticisms play out differently than the critics think. And he goes on to essentially say that we're going to just work through these challenges that are going to be evident with Web3 as we continue to roll it out, and see that there are major gaps with the level of motivation and incentive, etc. There's a lot of inertia essentially moving Web3 forward. We were missing trust, authority, and permission with traditional internet. We were missing the ability to transact with people for trusted relationships, transact and send money, store money, and then have all the other economic arrangements that the world wants, such as loans, contracts, insurance, and all these other things that, again, the internet really didn't enable in a formal, opinionated way. So he's saying we could actually imagine the entire global economy running on the blockchain like 30 or 50 years from now. And so he's kind of going on to extend this topic around Web3. Now, the interesting thing is, and we'll take a look at this in some of the other articles, is that in addition to this kind of really strong stance, there's also a lot of financial investment that he's making in Web3. So he's putting his money where his mouth is. But that could, of course, as some will argue in later articles, it could bias his opinion a little bit. Certainly, there is a strong kind of set of data to show that Web3 is here to stay, and it's going to continue to be pervasive. Let's take a look at the next article now and kind of dive into that some more. Okay, so now this is a really interesting kind of exact opposite side of the coin. This article says you can give people what they want, or you can give them Web3. And a very subtle start to the article there, right? But basically the concept is this writer is talking about how basically one of the key tenets that got Web2 going, and one of the key drivers, Paul Graham, basically said that you want to make something that customers actually want. The advice was applied to an entire generation of so-called Web 2.0 companies that include Facebook, YouTube, Airbnb, and dozens of other wildly successful companies. Couldn't agree more. And you also had Agile that came out of it. And one of the key tenets of Agile essentially is that you kind of get something out there quickly and then fail your way based on feedback. You just keep failing, try something, fail, get feedback, and then iterate to what the customers actually need. So you don't build something massive that's expensive, etc., that's gold-plated. He goes on to talk about in this article how Web3 is really different, and he talks about some of the underpinning kind of motivations behind this focus around Web3, and how essentially there's over the course of several minutes, he's talking about a interview that Andreessen had. Andreessen struggled to offer a real answer for what was good about Web3. So this author is essentially putting Andreessen on the spot virtually, and then he brings up this interview that happened where Andreessen was just asked over and over and over again, essentially, what is the value of Web3? And he landed on basically it's injecting economics at the very fundamental level, and it's internet native money, internet native economics and incentives into a system that simply hasn't had it. And so this interviewer, who was just continually asking Andreessen what is the point of Web3? How is it actually valuable? Really, in the opinion of this author, didn't give a comprehensible answer. So that's really interesting if you kind of press to the limit of kind of what is the value of Web3. It's essentially forcing this concept of using blockchain and using a lot of these kind of economic aspects, essentially, of the internet. My personal opinion is that it's definitely going to be something that plays out, but how quickly, that's going to be really the main question here. Now, if you go on to read this, he's saying you've just recreated an entire mortgage infrastructure that already exists today. Basically, again, another interview here. The host points this out to Andreessen and McCormick, another person who's a Web3 advocate. So you've just recreated the entire mortgage infrastructure that already exists today using NFTs and cryptocurrencies, essentially. And McCormick's confident response was, yes, but on the blockchain. And it's just like this kind of thought process of very focused on doing something using blockchain because the concept of blockchain makes sense in and of itself. You'll have seen in some of the previous articles that we looked at that AI and machine learning is tending toward taking a stronger stance and more of a winning stance because it's less of a sea change, it's less of a complete change in order to get things to happen. So that's a really interesting aspect of Web3 that folks can adopt, is making it more of a supportive resource, possibly a verification, logging, essentially a secondary starting place that it can then build up from and then take over the primary functions after it's proven itself. And folks have kind of adopted it and gotten used to it. This goes on to say that Web3 companies have generally treated users' needs as a secondary concern. And if you look at it and you think about some of the experiences you've had with Web3, you might agree with that, in that it's very challenging to use. So it's really at this kind of early adopter phase where you have to be very passionate about it to actually use it and see the value in it. This is a pretty cynical view, but I wanted you to view it, and you're welcome to take a look at the article because it hopefully will help keep you kind of thinking about some of the different perspectives that are out there. And here, just to kind of close this article out, he says, it's possible, maybe even likely, that game-changing Web3 applications will eventually come, just as the investors say they will. But for years, the only thing investors have been giving consumers is the promise of instantaneous wealth accumulation. And so he's focusing on the fact that maybe what's happened here, in a less cynical tone to close the article, folks just got myopically focused on the financial side of it and distracted by that. Whereas the actual promise of the technology of Web3 is really strong, but a lot of folks were very heavily incentivized. And so just like any new change, things are going to go through spurts of growth. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. So you kind of have this long-term horizon that a lot of folks are looking at, but how are you going to position yourself so that, like I recommended, possibly you can leverage Web3 in a supportive role while it goes through its kind of crypto winter and all the associated downsides with that. Okay, let's take a look at the next article now. Okay, so this one's talking about how Web3 can make investing more accessible. And as you go into it, what you'll see is that Web3 is being combined with AI and machine learning for this discussion. I would suggest that you kind of consider that as a big opportunity whenever you're dealing with Web3, is thinking about how the two can be married and play off of each other very nicely. In Web3, trading algorithms and AI will play a key role. At Trade Algo, we think these technologies can extract from decentralized structured data and turn them into meaningful insights and predictions. Absolutely true. We talk about that all the time, about how you can get raw data and turn it into something useful. Data privacy is a hot button issue, and Web3 will also allow users to control their own data in cold storage or in the cloud. Now, this is a really interesting aspect of Web3 in that data privacy in particular is really a huge opportunity for users to be able to establish themselves as the owners of their own data and leverage the blockchain and some of the capabilities around security and privacy that really are not standardized on Web 2.0 or the modern internet as we know it. So this could be a great foothold for Web3 to really take it to the next level. So key question here, how can you take advantage of that to play your cards optimally within the Web3 space? Trustless. The network will be trustless. Participants can interact publicly or privately without having to rely on a trusted third party, such as a clearinghouse or a centralized brokerage. Again, this is a common theme. And if you go to a lot of the really organic level proponents of Web3, this is really fundamentally what they're after. It's really this kind of freedom or meritocracy, kind of this, self-governance, if you will, without having to have big brother or, these clearinghouses or big corporations looking over our shoulders and controlling things. So really, really interesting. One of the interesting kind of side notes in this article, and I thought it was interesting that it was included here, is that Goldman Sachs estimates that the metaverse component of Web3 could eventually be worth $8 trillion. So I think what they're saying here in general in this article is that when you combine AI and machine learning with trading, it's a really powerful capability. And then they kind of go off to get into some tangents talking about some of the key aspects of Web3. This would include the metaverse. This is going to include trustless frameworks, open, the ability to essentially take advantage of the benefits of blockchain to help ensure the data privacy. And ultimately, you have to kind of factor all of these in whenever you're considering how Web3 could be utilized in your situation. Or with your clients, for example, and what they're going to pragmatically be able to benefit from in the near term, and where big investments are going to make a lot of sense. Okay, let's wrap up with this last article. And this one is talking about how payroll is a huge opportunity for Web3. Now, if you take a look at this in detail, and let me just zoom it in here, the US payroll industry is a $62 billion behemoth. It doesn't even include the rest of the global payroll industry. And it would be fit to be disrupted by the emergent and powerful tools enabled by blockchain. An entire ecosystem of payday lenders, overdraft fees, and expensive check cashiers has emerged to support the payroll industry. And these intermediaries cost Americans upwards of $15 billion annually. So just by creating an arbitrage to reduce the cost and be maybe a non-traditional approach, but go in and help provide, reduction of lending costs, overdraft fees, reducing expensive check cashing, etc. This would be a huge opportunity for some of these folks in the Web3 space. So they go on to say that one of the core building blocks of the future of work must be a digitally native, significantly cheaper payroll infrastructure. It should allow for the meshing of digitally native payment features and legacy medical benefits, retirement accounts, and tax requirements. So this is a pretty lofty list, but you can see a consistency around this idea of having users own their data and making it possible infrastructure-wise to enable that, making it secure and making it something that the user themselves can control. They wrap up to say that Web3 technologists have so much green space to innovate in and a responsibility to build the applications of tomorrow on solid ground. So generally speaking, what you'll see here with Web3 is it's going to be going through a lot of development, a lot of not just, Wild West or new technology, but a lot of just very nascent concepts even. And how is that going to work socially? And really one of the best ways to take advantage of this is to find a niche and to find a specific segment where you can provide secondary or even tertiary support with these technologies and then make it positive for that industry and make it cash flow valuable. And if you can do that and you can continue to build on that, then you can essentially leverage that into bigger gains. That's really what AI and machine learning has done. And you can really gain a lot of value from seeing how AI and machine learning has grown, doing very pragmatic and maybe even boring things, but doing it on an incremental level. Thanks again for watching this edition of Web3 in the News. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching this edition of TechLaunch in the News. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe so you can see more in the news resources. We also have complimentary masterclasses and other resources available to you on our website, www.gotechlaunch.com. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them in the comments section. And until next time, thanks for watching and bye for now.